12 years. That's how long it's been since my name stopped echoing in their halls. Since my shadow was scrubbed from family photos and my voice deleted from every voicemail box I once filled with affection, plans, and Sunday night check-ins. I wasn't just forgotten, I was erased. It's a strange thing to be made a ghost while you're still alive. But today, I decided to haunt them in person. Camille's invitation wasn't meant for me. It didn't need to be. The moment I saw the headline of the Society column, Delacroix family hosts Golden Anniversary Gala at Willowgate Estate, I knew it was the night. The same estate where I once carved my initials into the oak banister as a joke. The same chandelier that had once witnessed our first kiss, hanging overhead like a relic of a life rewritten without me. I stood across the street from the estate for 5 full minutes before walking in. The night air clung to me, thick with magnolia and tension. In my arms, a small black box, gift-wrapped in matte paper with a silver ribbon. Not flashy, but deliberate. Much like me now. I had chosen the charcoal suit carefully tailored, classic, sharp enough to remind anyone who dared to look too long that I wasn't someone they could dismiss. My hair, once unruly and sun-streaked, was now trimmed and neat, the beard intentional. I didn't need them to remember the man I was. I came to show them the man they tried to erase. The estate's gates creaked open with the same old groan, and I stepped onto the cobblestone path. 2 valet boys stood near the entrance, not even giving me a second glance. Good. I didn't want whispers yet. Not until I was inside. I crossed the threshold like a man returning to a crime scene. The foyer still smelled of lemon polish and money. There were voices, laughter, music, Billie Holiday, maybe. I paused just inside the archway to the grand hall, letting the scene unfold in front of me. Chandeliers bathed the room in gold. Laughter floated through clinking champagne glasses. The Delacroix did love their opulence. Charles and Vivian in the center of it all, their designer smiles and carefully lifted faces aglow in curated joy. Camille wasn't far off, standing by the fireplace like a monarch at court, regal in a silver gown, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a man I didn't recognize yet. I didn't rush. I let myself be forgotten for another minute for old time's sake. My gaze swept the room, catching half-remembered faces. College friends. Distant cousins. Neighbors who once invited me to poker night. None of them looked twice at me. They had no idea who I was. And then a Charles. He turned toward me as if pulled by some unseen force. Our eyes met. For half a second, I braced myself for recognition. For something. But all I got was a nod. Dismissive. Polite. The kind of nod you give a stranger in a nice suit who might be somebody's plus one. I swallowed that like a bitter pill and stepped forward, box underarm, chin high. Let them all wonder. Let the whispers start slowly. I wasn't here to shout. I was here to be undeniable. Halfway through the hall, someone brushed past me, nearly spilling their champagne. They apologized without looking, then did a double take. But by then I was already moving again. Camille's voice, light, lilting, designed to disarm, floated above the chatter. I followed it until I was close enough to see the gold band on her finger. New. The man beside her, tall, broad-shouldered, smug, must have been the new husband. His hand rested possessively on the small of her back, like a flag planted on stolen land. I took one more step. He noticed me first. His brow furrowed. "Can I help you?" he asked, smile polite but tight. I looked past him, straight at her. Camille's laughter froze mid-breath. Her eyes locked onto mine. And in that second, the world forgot how to breathe. She dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the marble. And then, she fell. Not in slow motion. Not with grace. Her knees hit the ground with a crack. A gasp spread through the room like wildfire. Conversations halted. A waiter froze mid-pour. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood there as Camille stared up at me, wide-eyed and pale, as if she'd seen a ghost. Which, in a way, she had. I hadn't come to disrupt. I hadn't come to beg. I came to be seen. And finally, I was. The room was a fragile thing, still and breathless, as though someone had draped the silence over it like a wet sheet. Camille didn't move. She stayed on her knees, frozen, trembling fingers poised above the glittering shards of her fallen champagne flute. Her expression teetered between disbelief and dread. That same face I once traced with my thumb every morning, now foreign under layers of distance and time. She looked up at me like I was death wearing a memory. I didn't speak. The weight of recognition hadn't landed on the others yet. They were still searching their minds, sifting through old party guests and former colleagues, trying to place the man who had just made their hostess crumble like a rotted beam under too much pressure. That's when her husband, Tate, I assumed, decided to play night. He stepped between us like a security guard rather than a husband, chest puffed, chin slightly raised. I could see in his eyes he wasn't used to being ignored. "You lost?" he asked, his tone light but lined with territorial pride. I smiled faintly, adjusting the box under my arm. "No," I said. "I know exactly where I am." Tate's eyes flicked to Camille, then back to me. "Then maybe you're confused about where you're supposed to be." That made me chuckle, low and dry. "If she tells you who I am," I said, voice low enough to make him lean in, "some people might start running." His smirk faltered. Camille still hadn't moved. She looked like she wanted to speak, but couldn't make her throat obey. I could practically hear the ticking in her head, the mental sprint to catch up to a moment she never expected to happen. Especially not here, not in front of her curated world. She had orchestrated this night like a symphony. Everything about the room screamed old money and polished reputation, glittering gowns, tailored suits, fresh florals and expensive minimalist faces, live jazz trilling from the balcony. But now, the centerpiece was chaos. Tate's jaw clenched. "Who the hell are you?" Before I could answer, a sound sliced through the stillness. Camille's breath sharp, like she'd been punched. She gripped the leg of a nearby chair and slowly pulled herself to standing. Her hands trembled. Her eyes never left mine. She looked at me like she'd just remembered how to breathe and hated what came with it. "Don't," she whispered. Not to Tate. To me. But it was too late for don'ts. 12 years too late. Behind her, I noticed movement. Vivian, Camille's mother, stiff in her navy gown, one manicured hand clutched over her pearl necklace as though it might snap if she let go. Her eyes widened in shock, but still, she said nothing. Charles looked at his daughter, then at me, confusion wrinkling his brow. "Camille? What's going on?" he asked, voice louder than necessary. People were starting to murmur. Still, I didn't rush. I turned slightly, giving the room a better look at my face. A few older guests squinted. One woman placed a hand on her chest as if she was beginning to see the ghost in the suit. No one moved toward me. No one dared. Camille's breath hitched again. "You didn't tell them?" I asked her, softer now. "Not even Charles?" Her mouth opened, then closed. I stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, until I was only a foot away from Tate. He stiffened, but didn't retreat. Not yet. He was still trying to figure out what kind of story he was in. I looked down at the box in my hand, then back at Camille. "Should I give this to him?" I asked, tilting my head toward her husband. "Or would you prefer I let the whole room see what's inside?" Her knees buckled slightly. She reached behind her for the edge of the fireplace, grounding herself. The jazz music sputtered to a halt upstairs. Someone must have told the band to stop playing. Now the silence wasn't empty, it was a fuse. From the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. A woman in a burgundy dress, tall, lean, eyes like a fox. She held her wine glass tighter than necessary, her gaze fixed on me like she was seeing a ghost, but remembering something else too. Daria, Camille's cousin. We'd barely spoken back then, but I remembered her. More importantly, she remembered me. Her expression tightened. She knew. I saw it in the way she shifted her weight, in the tremble that went through her wrist. Daria was there the night it all started unraveling. She was part of the silence, too. I let the quiet stretch a little longer, just long enough for the tension to become unbearable. Then I spoke. 12 years ago, I began, my voice calm and certain. I disappeared. But I never left. The weight of it dropped like a thunderclap in a closed room. Gasps echoed. Camille closed her eyes. Daria lowered her wine. And Tate? He took a small step back, finally realizing he wasn't the one holding power in this conversation. They didn't know what I'd brought with me. Not yet. But they would. And when they did, this house would never be the same. It didn't take long for the weight of my words to ripple across the room. Camille stood motionless, as if moving might crack whatever facade she was desperately clinging to. Her face had drained of color, and her hand, once steady and poised, trembled as she clutched the fireplace mantle like it might anchor her to reality. All eyes had shifted to me, the once forgotten man now anchoring the room's attention like gravity. And still, no one moved toward me. No one ever moves toward the truth. Charles was the first to speak again. "Camille," he barked, voice gravelly and urgent. "What's going on? Who is this man?" His gaze darted to me, then back to her, as if my presence rewrote the language of the night. But Camille didn't answer. It was Vivian who gasped first, a sharp sound that turned heads. She stepped forward, her fingers white around the stem of her wine glass, staring at me like she was seeing a ghost she'd tried to forget. "No," she whispered, and I caught it, even from across the room. "It can't be." I raised an eyebrow. "It can," I said. "And it is." Somewhere near the back of the room, a chair scraped across the marble as someone stood. The crowd was starting to shift, curiosity battling discomfort. But only one person locked eyes with me and didn't look away, Daria. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Her gaze was sharp, unrelenting, and threaded with something far more dangerous than fear, memory. I knew in that moment she remembered exactly who I was. And more importantly, she remembered exactly what Camille had done. 12 years ago, Daria was there the night it all crumbled. When the lies began. When my name was stripped from the family, from Camille's lips, from the photo albums on the mantle. She was there when Camille made herself the victim, when she convinced everyone I had walked away from her at the worst time of her life. The cancer scare. The alleged abandonment. The tale of the unworthy husband who couldn't handle adversity. It was all fiction. Beautiful, carefully constructed fiction. And Daria had been silent. Like the rest of them. Until now. Her glass tilted in her hand, just slightly. A tremor. A giveaway. She was weighing something, probably everything. But I saw it, the guilt simmering beneath her surface. The kind that never really goes away. I stepped further into the room, slow and sure. No one stopped me. They parted like water, unsure whether I was a threat or a reckoning. "I was here once," I said quietly, scanning the room. "Not as a guest. As family." A few whispers passed between guests. Names being muttered, fragments of old stories resurrected from the attic of memory. I could hear them straining to recall the scandal, the whispers that followed Camille's swift and silent divorce, the rumor that her husband had simply vanished one night without a word. "I remember you," a man muttered near the back. He was older now, grayer, but the lines of recognition were clear in his face. What was your name again?" I looked straight at Camille as I spoke. "The one you all forgot." That struck. I watched her flinch, watched Charles reel slightly like the floor had just shifted under his expensive shoes. "Enough," Camille snapped suddenly, her voice brittle and sharp. "This isn't the time or place." "No," I said. "It's the perfect time. You just never thought I'd show up to tell the rest of the story." Tate stepped forward again, more unsure now. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but you don't know because you weren't there." I cut in. "You weren't here when she told everyone I left. That I abandoned her when she was sick. That I emptied our savings and ran." Eyes widened. The story was familiar. Everyone had heard it, at some point or another, filtered through Camille's flawless retellings and the family's rehearsed nods. "But I didn't run," I said. I was pushed. Camille's hands balled into fists at her sides. Her voice dropped an octave. "Why are you doing this?" "Because the silence you gave me didn't kill me," I said. "It sharpened me." Then, as if a dam finally cracked, Daria took a step forward. "I remember," she said, loud enough to turn heads. "I remember everything." Camille whipped around. "Daria." "No," Daria said firmly. "You don't get to shush me anymore." A hush fell again, heavier than the last. "I was there the night she changed the story," Daria said. "I saw the paperwork. I heard the voicemails. I knew the truth. And I stayed quiet because I was afraid." Camille's eyes glistened, but it wasn't remorse. It was fear. "You knew?" Charles asked, aghast. "All this time." Daria nodded, slowly, swallowing hard. "He didn't leave her. She made sure he was erased. Because the truth didn't fit the image." The words struck the crowd like thunder. Shifting feet, nervous glances. And Camille? She looked like the world had finally caught up to her. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The lie had started unraveling. And I hadn't even opened the box yet. I didn't speak right away. I let the truth hang in the air like a live wire, crackling through the crowd. Let them absorb it, not just the revelation, but the weight of the years it had been buried. Charles stared at Daria like he didn't recognize his own niece. And Camille, she looked like someone trying to hold a door closed against a storm. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't say a word. Not yet. That was the difference between us. She needed lies to speak, but I learned how to weaponize silence. I stepped forward, every eye following me, until I reached the table that held the towering anniversary cake and $1,000 floral centerpiece. I placed the small black box beside it with deliberate care, like a ritual offering. No sudden movements, no raised voice. Just purpose. "You all said I walked out on her," I began, voice steady but loud enough to carry. "That I vanished during her illness, left her to fend for herself. You didn't ask questions. You didn't come looking. You just believed it. I scanned their faces, old friends, former business partners, Camille's sorority sisters, all of them too complicit or too comfortable to challenge her version of events. You called me a coward, a traitor, a disappointment. I turned slowly toward Camille. But the only one who abandoned anything was you. Her lips parted like she might finally defend herself. But I beat her to it. Should I tell them, Camille? I asked. Or should I just play the voicemail? The one you left me the night I found out you were never sick to begin with. Gasps echoed around the room. Vivian staggered slightly, catching herself on the arm of Charles's chair. Her face, always composed, always serene, now cracked in a dozen places. Her pearl necklace trembled at her throat. Camille's hand lifted slightly. Don't. No, I said, louder now. They need to hear it. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small voice recorder. A relic of the past, maybe, but I'd kept everything. Not out of obsession, out of survival. When your name has been smeared like mine was, every receipt becomes sacred. Every word matters. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room. I needed an out, okay? I needed you to go so I could move forward. I didn't expect you to disappear so completely, but it worked. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to get so big. You were just too boring to deserve my world. There it was. Every syllable like a blade. Camille lunged forward, nearly knocking over the table. Stop it, she shouted, voice shrill with panic. This is insane. But it was already too late. The crowd had heard it. The people she'd convinced, manipulated, charmed into pitying her, they were watching her now with different eyes. Not admiration. Not concern. Disgust. I spent 2 years trying to prove I hadn't stolen from her, I continued. My voice calm despite the fire in my chest. She sent that voicemail the night I confronted her about the diagnosis. Turns out, the lab results she cried over were borrowed from a coworker. Staged. The entire narrative she gave you? Manufactured. Designed to make me vanish cleanly. Tate looked like he'd been punched. He turned to Camille, his face pale, mouth barely moving. You lied about the cancer? Camille didn't answer. Charles finally stood, hands braced on the table, face a mask of disbelief. This isn't possible, he said quietly. I paid for her treatment. I wrote the checks. Which she cashed into a private account, I said, pulling out a second folder from inside my jacket. Along with everything from our joint savings. She told you I drained it. She used it to start her business. You know, the one you always brag about at golf tournaments. Camille backed away slowly, her heel catching on the carpet. She looked like a cornered animal, wounded, desperate. Vivian looked down at her daughter like she was seeing a stranger. You faked cancer? To ruin a man's life? I didn't fake it, Camille snapped, her voice sharp now, mask fully off. I just leaned into the assumption. He was never supposed to come back. But I did, I said. Because I knew one day the lies would catch up to you. I didn't come here for revenge. I came to stop being the villain in a story I didn't write. I opened the box slowly. Inside was a manila envelope, thick with paper. Photocopies of the medical reports. Bank statements. Screenshots of her messages to my former boss. Messages that planted the seeds of theft, incompetence, infidelity. She didn't just remove me from her life. She made sure I had no life left to return to. I rebuilt from nothing, I said, staring at her. I spent years clearing my name. Years wondering if I was the only one who remembered I existed. You didn't just move on, Camille. You made sure I couldn't. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I used to believe closure came from conversation, I said, placing the envelope back in the box. But it doesn't. It comes from clarity. And tonight, everyone here finally has it. I looked around. The silence that followed wasn't confused anymore. It was reckoning. Tate stepped between us like a man waking up in the middle of someone else's nightmare. He shook his head slowly, lips parted in disbelief, glancing down at the documents in the open box like they might vanish if he blinked hard enough. This has to be fake, he said, but even his voice didn't believe it. It doesn't make sense. Camille said she was divorced. She said it was amicable. I reached into the box and pulled out a folded certificate, old, creased, but legally intact. You should read this, Tate, I said, handing it to him. That's our marriage license. And the updated court record showing no finalized divorce. Not because I contested it, but because she never filed. He looked down at it, and I watched the color drain from his face. His eyes jumped from the document to Camille. You said it was all settled. That there was nothing left between you two. That he gestured at me with a trembling hand, was ancient history. Camille opened her mouth, her lips trembling, but nothing came out. Her silence was no longer strategic, it was defensive. The truth had ripped a hole in the reality she'd built, and she was standing at the edge, watching it fall. "I'm still her legal husband, Tate," I said calmly. "So technically, you're not married." "And this?" I nodded at the lavish party, the guests, the rented string quartet that had gone mute upstairs. "This is all built on a lie." Charles dropped into a chair behind the dessert table like someone had pulled the strings out of him. His hands trembled on his knees. "Camille," he whispered, "tell me this isn't true." She shook her head, not in denial but in disbelief. Her face was pale, eyes darting from her father to Tate, then to me. "I thought I filed," she croaked finally. "I thought I did." "No, Camille," I said. "You hoped I wouldn't check. You hoped I'd stay gone. And when I didn't, you still tried to keep the story together. The problem with lies," I added, "is that they age like milk." Tate's jaw clenched. "How long did you know?" he asked her, eyes full of something that wasn't quite betrayal yet, but close. "About all of this?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence screamed for her. Vivian stepped forward, wine glass still in hand though her grip on it was shaky. Her voice was low and cracked. "You had the entire family pitying you. We defended you. We distanced ourselves from him. I cut ties with his family." She paused, blinking fast. "You told me he left you during chemo. I sent you money every month. I made dinners, held your hand." She trailed off. No one spoke. Tate let the certificate slip from his hand onto the table. He looked at Camille like he didn't recognize her anymore. "Did you ever love me?" he asked. Camille didn't even flinch. And that was the loudest answer of all. A new wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Friends exchanged glances. The kind of society people who came for cocktails and jazz were now rooted in place by scandal and disbelief. I watched them, how quickly admiration turned to suspicion. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about them realizing they had celebrated a lie. Charles finally looked at me. Really looked. For the first time that night, he didn't see a stranger. His face changed in real time, shock morphing into guilt, guilt folding into something that looked dangerously close to shame. "You were my son," he said softly. "I stood at your wedding. I gave a toast. I remember," I said. "You called me the son you never had. And then you disappeared without a word when she said I left." He nodded slowly, the weight of 12 years hitting all at once. Camille turned, desperate now. "You don't understand it." "I do," I cut in. "More than you think." I pulled out the final sheet from the envelope. A bank transfer. Date stamped 3 weeks after I left. It showed every cent from our joint account moved into a newly opened business fund under her name. "This is how you bought the lease to your bakery," I said. "The one you said was funded by your grit and a loan from your parents." I handed the sheet to Charles. He took it with shaking hands, read it, then dropped it like it burned. His face had collapsed inward. A man looking at the ruins of something he thought he'd built strong. "I slept in my car for 2 months," I continued, "while she bought furniture, branded boxes, signed licensing agreements, told the world I was a ghost." Camille's voice cracked. "You were supposed to let it go." That stopped me. I turned back toward her, really facing her now. "You don't get to rewrite my life, and then tell me to move on like it never happened. You don't get to wear pearls and play victim while I dig myself out of the grave you buried me in. You had your party, Camille. I brought the truth to dance." Tate walked away. He didn't speak, didn't look back, just walked right out the front door. Camille stood alone in the middle of the wreckage she caused. No applause, no champagne, just silence. And for once, it was hers to carry. Camille's mouth open like she had one final monologue ready, some grand defense that might magically pull the broken pieces of her narrative back together. But all that came out was a breath, a stuttering inhale that died before it reached sound. Her spine straightened as if trying to remember the woman she was 5 minutes ago, composed, celebrated, untouchable. But even in heels and diamonds, she couldn't rise above the truth anymore. Not now. Not in this room. She turned to me, eyes narrowing with what might have once been dignity, but now looked like panic and pearls. "I thought I filed," she said again, barely above a whisper, but I caught it. The lie was fraying at the edges. Her voice lacked conviction. The room didn't believe her anymore. "You didn't forget," I replied quietly, shaking my head. "You didn't file because a clean break would have meant losing control. You didn't want a divorce. You wanted an erasure. So you could rewrite the story without loose ends or contradictions. I wasn't supposed to come back and be anything more than a rumor." She flinched. I turned toward the table where the black box still sat open, the documents inside casting shadows under the soft white lights. The room had gone still again, but not with confusion this time. This was the weight of clarity pressing down on every single person who had once clinked a glass and nodded in agreement when Camille spun her sob story. I could feel their shame like heat on my skin. Slowly, I reached into the box and pulled out one last folder, thicker than the rest. Bound with twine, hand-labeled. The air around us thickened. Camille's eyes locked onto it, and for the first time that evening, true fear etched across her face. This, I said, holding it up for all to see, is the real history. I spent 10 years collecting every receipt, every voicemail, every email, everything she did to make sure I stayed buried. Camille took a step forward. Please. No, I snapped, my voice louder now. The room jolted. You don't get to beg for mercy in front of people you trained to hate me. You don't get to ask for silence when you weaponized it for over a decade. I laid the folder gently on the table. Inside, I continued, are screenshots of Camille's messages to my boss, suggesting I was embezzling company funds, that I was mentally unstable, that I'd been showing signs of paranoia. I met the eyes of an older man across the room, Mr. Winslow, the man who'd fired me 12 years ago. She didn't just ruin our marriage, I said, looking at him. She ruined my career. Mr. Winslow's face paled. He looked down into his glass, the shame visibly clawing at him. And here, I said, pulling another document free and laying it flat, is the timeline of every transfer she made from our shared account into a shell business she created while still married to me. Funds she used to start her company, without a loan, without sweat equity, without honesty. Camille stood frozen, arms limp at her sides, the corners of her eyes glistening. Her mouth twitched, but no words followed. I remember every night I went hungry while she cashed checks. I remember every time I begged a landlord for one more week. I remember rebuilding my resume with a reputation so damaged, I had to use initials instead of my name just to get interviews. The crowd was silent. No one touched their glasses now. No one checked their phones. The chandeliers above hummed faintly, the only sound aside from the occasional shuffle of someone adjusting their stance out of discomfort. I looked down at the last item in the box. An old photo, me and Camille, back when the world was still right side up. I was 27. She had daisies in her hair. We were smiling. Young. Naive. In love. I held it up. This is what you stole, I said. Not money. Not property. My life. Camille moved forward finally. Her steps slow, uncertain. I thought you were gone, she whispered. I didn't know you were still holding on. I let the photo fall back into the box. I wasn't holding on to you. I was holding on to the truth. Because unlike you, I couldn't live without it. Her expression shifted, something crumpling inside her. For a moment, she looked hollow. I thought if I told them everything, they'd hate me, she said. That they'd never forgive me. They probably won't, I replied. But I didn't come here for their forgiveness. I came because I was tired of carrying the blame for your sins. She nodded, once, a shaky, pathetic motion that barely passed for understanding. Then she stepped back, away from the box, away from me. The crowd parted, leaving her isolated in the center of the room, the perfect visual of the truth laid bare. Everything she'd built was now built on broken glass. Vivian sat down beside Charles, her hand gripping his. Daria stood still near the edge of the crowd, her eyes watery, her mouth pressed into a tight, guilty line. Camille looked around the room, then back at me. What happens now? She asked. I stared at her. The woman who once said I was too boring to deserve her world. The woman who destroyed mine and forged a new kingdom out of the rubble. Now, I said. Now, I live. And you deal with the consequences. And with that, I turned away from the wreckage she had dressed up as a legacy. Daria's voice cut through the still air like a trembling blade. He's telling the truth. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to draw every pair of eyes toward her. Enough to shatter whatever illusion Camille might have still clung to in the fading silence. And most of all, it was enough for me. I didn't need a standing ovation, just acknowledgement. A single witness who would no longer lie by omission. Daria stepped forward from the shadows of the room, her heels hesitant on the marble, her expression etched with years of quiet complicity. She looked at me first, eyes full of guilt and something softer, something that almost resembled sorrow. Then she turned to Camille, her cousin, her childhood partner in secrets, and for the first time tonight, she chose the truth over tradition. I was there, she said, louder now, her voice finding strength as it moved. I saw the papers, Camille. The ones you forged. I heard the voicemail you left him. The one you deleted from your phone but forgot was saved to your old cloud account. She took another step forward. You told me he hit you, that he emptied your accounts and threatened your life. I believed you. Camille's body sagged like someone had taken the bones out of her frame. Daria, please. You lied, Daria snapped, and the room recoiled. You looked me in the eye and lied to me, and I defended you. I helped bury him because I thought I was protecting you. Her voice wobbled, but she didn't stop. I stayed silent when he vanished from the family. I stayed silent when you married Tate. I stayed silent when people started asking questions and you fed them carefully rehearsed half-truths. And the whole time, I kept thinking she must have had a reason. She must have been hurt. But you weren't hurt. You were ambitious and selfish. Camille stood frozen, her hands open at her sides like even her body didn't know how to move anymore. Her face had lost its polish, her makeup softening at the corners under the weight of her sweat and tears. She looked small. And I couldn't help but think of the countless nights I imagined this moment. But none of those fantasies felt like this. None of them accounted for the hollowness of vindication. I'm sorry, Daria said, turning to me. Her voice was softer now, directed only at me. I should have spoken up a long time ago. I held her gaze. You're speaking now, I said simply. Behind her, the crowd shifted. The weight of collective shame was spreading. These were people who had celebrated Camille's rise, toasted her courage, reposted her interviews where she spoke about resilience and surviving abandonment. They had bathed in the myth she created because it made for good stories at brunch, at charity fundraisers, at baby showers. But now the curtain had fallen. And what was left on stage wasn't strength. It was theft. Camille looked around like she was searching for an exit that didn't exist. The pillars of her carefully curated image were crumbling in real time, and she didn't know where to stand anymore. You didn't just erase him, Daria said, quieter now. You built a new life on his grave. That sentence, it hit like a funeral bell. Someone near the buffet coughed uncomfortably. Another guest quietly slipped toward the side door, murmuring something about getting air, though we all knew what it meant. They'd come for the glitter and gossip, not for the reckoning. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the weight of it all. For years, I had wandered the world like a man with no name. I'd taken jobs beneath my skill level, accepted handshakes laced with suspicion, eaten alone more nights than I cared to count, all because of a narrative that began in this very room. And now, that narrative was ash. Camille turned to me one final time, her lips parting like she wanted to spin a new version, some softer rewrite of her motives, her choices. But then her gaze flicked to the box on the table, to the folder still spread open, to Daria's trembling shoulders, and she seemed to understand that no story she told now would land. You don't know what it was like, she said quietly, voice raw. The pressure. The expectations. You were always so decent, so stable. And I was terrified I'd never become anything, that I'd never be enough. I didn't flinch. Then you should have left, I said. With honesty. You should have told the truth and walked away. But you didn't. You chose destruction. You chose to ruin me to rise higher. And now you get to stand in what you built. A long silence stretched between us. But for once, she didn't try to fill it. I nodded toward Daria. Thank you, I said, and meant it. She nodded back, tearfully, then stepped aside. Camille lowered her eyes, and for the first time since I walked through that door, she looked like she finally understood what she had done, not just to me, but to everyone in that room. To herself. The lie was dead, and the truth had a pulse again. Charles Delacroix wasn't a man used to being silent. He was the type who filled rooms with opinions and firm handshakes, a patriarch who commanded attention without ever raising his voice. But now he stood trembling, the skin around his eyes tighter than before, his hand gripping the edge of the table beside the anniversary cake as if the truth might knock him to the floor. Slowly, like an old man waking from a long, indulgent dream, he stepped toward the box I'd placed. His eyes passed over the documents, the voice recorder, the photo of a younger, happier version of me. But what he finally picked up was the folder, the one with the financial records. He opened it like it might explode. One page, then another, then another. The deeper he read, the more his expression twisted, not in anger at me, but at something closer to disbelief and betrayal. You mean to tell me? His voice cracked like he couldn't believe he was saying the words aloud. The trust fund? The startup money? The Delacroix Foundation grant? None of that was hers. Camille didn't speak. She didn't even raise her head. Camille, he said again, firmer now. Answer me. She stayed still, back to him, like if she didn't look into his eyes, it wouldn't be real. But silence had lost all its magic. Tell me it's not true, he said. Tell me I didn't shake hands with executives and donors, praising your rise while you climbed on a man's life you buried like a secret. Still nothing. Vivian's voice cut through. Charles. But he raised a hand. Don't, he said sharply. Let her speak. Camille turned around slowly. Her eyes glistened, mascara clinging to the corners, but there was no performance left. No armor. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she said, her voice like torn paper. I wanted to make something of myself. And so you destroyed someone else to do it? Charles snapped, stepping closer. You looked us in the eye for 12 years. 12 years, Camille. And you let us believe a lie. You let us abandon a man who stood by you when you had nothing. And for what? A business? Applause? Her chin quivered. It wasn't just about that. No, I interrupted, voice low but cutting. It was about survival, wasn't it? She looked at me, and for once, I didn't see malice or manipulation. I saw what remained after everything else had collapsed. Shame. You want to know what survival looks like? I stepped forward, slowly. It's sleeping on a park bench with a wedding band still on your finger. It's watching your name dragged through court documents while you clean restaurant kitchens under an alias. Survival is sending money from part-time jobs to a woman who told the world you were violent and unstable, just so you'd believe there was still good in her. Tate was gone. Long gone. He hadn't said a word when he left. Just walked out the front door like he'd opened it into another world. One without Camille. I turned back to Charles. You asked if it was true. All of it. And the answer is yes. She forged that world like an artist. But she didn't do it alone. You all helped paint the picture. You didn't just believe her. You protected her version like gospel. Charles's shoulders slumped like a man absorbing the full weight of his role. He looked at Camille again, but there was no warmth left in his expression. Just ruin. Do you even know who you are anymore? He asked her. Camille didn't respond. Not because she refused, but because I think, deep down, she didn't know. I turned back to the guests, those who remained. Some were already leaving. Others lingered out of obligation, discomfort etched deep into their eyes. The same people who had nodded and clapped for Camille's speeches about overcoming abandonment were now wide-eyed, exposed by the truth they had ignored. You all raised glasses to her success, I said. But you never asked where it came from. You never wondered why I disappeared. Because it was easier to believe I was a monster than admit you'd all been fooled. A beat passed. I'm not here to humiliate anyone. I continued. I didn't come to burn this place down. But I've been living in its ashes for 12 years. So tonight, I brought them home. Camille turned toward her mother. Vivian still seated, stiff, as though trying to disappear into the upholstery of her chair. Mom, she whispered, barely audible. I didn't mean. But Vivian didn't offer her a hand. She turned her head away, slow and deliberate. I believed you, she said coldly. I told your story like it was truth. And now I don't know how many people I hurt because of it. Camille's body sagged again. She was alone now. Really, truly alone. 12 years ago, I was cast out from this family like a stain they couldn't wash away. Now, I had returned not to reclaim a place, but to show them who I had become in their absence. Camille had rewritten history. I'd just brought back the original manuscript, and they finally read it. I didn't need to gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching Camille fall apart. No pleasure in seeing her silenced, her carefully sculpted world crack under the weight of truth. I dreamt of this night 1,000 different ways. Imagined triumphant speeches. Imagined her on her knees begging for forgiveness. Imagined vindication wrapped in thunderous applause. But now, standing in the same room where I'd once been celebrated and then erased, all I felt was done. Not victorious. Not even angry. Just done. I looked at Camille one last time. She wasn't crying. Her face was frozen in the kind of stunned stillness that follows a storm. Around her, the crowd had thinned. People were excusing themselves under the pretense of bathroom breaks, phone calls, urgent appointments. But I knew better. The truth was an uncomfortable companion. Most people preferred the lie. Charles still stood there, his mouth slightly open, shoulders squared like he wanted to take back time and start again. Vivian wouldn't look at anyone. She stared at the floor, her hand on her glass, though she hadn't taken a sip in over 20 minutes. And Daria, still near the edge of the chaos, stood like a sentinel, too shaken to move but unwilling to retreat. I turned toward Camille. I didn't come here to hurt you, I said, and the weight of that truth landed on me as I spoke it aloud. You might think I planned all this to destroy you, but I didn't. I came so you'd finally face what you've done, and so I could finally let go of it." Her eyes flickered, just briefly, and something in her face twitched, like she almost believed me. I reached into the box and pulled out an envelope, thicker than the others, sealed and stamped. My final gift. I walked to the table and slid it across to Charles, who hesitated before picking it up. "What is this?" he asked. "A certified withdrawal," I said, "from every lawsuit I could have filed. Defamation, financial damages, breach of trust. All of it. It's signed, notarized, and complete." He blinked. "You're not pressing charges?" I shook my head. "I don't need to." Camille took a step forward. "Why?" Her voice was hoarse now. "Hollow. After everything, why not bury me?" I looked her in the eye and said, without anger, "Because I don't need you to fall anymore. I just needed to stop carrying the weight you left behind." And it was true. For so long, I thought closure would come when she paid, when the world saw her for what she was. But now that it had happened, now that the curtain had dropped, I realized I didn't need her to be punished. I just needed to stop shrinking myself to fit the narrative she built. "I'm not staying," I said. "I'm not here to fix anything. This isn't an invitation to reconnect or rebuild. I just needed to return, one last time, to say what I was never given the space to say." Vivian's voice was soft behind me. "What happens now?" I turned toward her, toward Charles, toward all of them. "Now," I said. "Now I leave." I reached down and closed the box, gathering the folder, the certificate, the recordings. But I left the photo behind. The one of us in younger years. That moment, that illusion, didn't belong to me anymore. It never had. I picked up my coat, then turned back toward the hall. No one followed. Camille didn't cry out. Charles didn't call my name. Daria didn't ask me to wait. They all just watched as I walked away from the legacy I once helped build and was buried under. My shoes echoed against the marble. I passed the same entryway I had walked through earlier in silence, unnoticed. But now, every eye left in the room watched me go. Not because they admired me. Not because they pitied me. Because they saw me. And that was all I ever really wanted. I stepped outside into the cool night air. The porch light flickered above me. A breeze passed through the hedges, rustling leaves in a soft whisper. I paused for just a moment, glancing back, not out of regret, but acknowledgement. 12 years ago, I left through this same door under a cloud of lies. Tonight, I walked out in the truth. I descended the steps, each one lighter than the last. The box tucked under my arm, the silence now mine, not something given, but something earned. For years, I had been the ghost haunting Camille's perfect world. The missing piece everyone refused to talk about. But ghosts fade when you face them. And tonight, I had faced them all. I reached the curb and unlocked my car. Slid into the driver's seat. Rested the box on the passenger's side. The engine turned over smooth and soft. I sat there for a second, watching the house shrink in the rearview mirror. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. And that was worth more than any apology they could have offered. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at my studio, handwritten, no return address, sealed with a pale pink wax stamp I remembered too well. Camille always did have a flair for the dramatic. I stared at the envelope for a full 5 minutes before opening it. No rush. The damage was done. The words couldn't wound me anymore. Not now. Not with truth on my side. Inside was a single page. No stationery, no perfumed paper, no neat formatting. Just her handwriting, uneven, rushed in places, like her thoughts outran the pen. "I don't know where to start," it began. Classic. She went on, line after line, pouring half apologies and fragmented confessions onto the page. She admitted that some of the things I said were true. Not all, of course. Camille couldn't give full ground even when the battlefield was empty. She wrote about pressure, about legacy, about how being a Delacroix came with invisible chains. She said she never thought I'd come back, never imagined I'd still care. But most of all, she wrote that she didn't realize how much of herself she'd buried alongside me. She didn't ask for forgiveness. But she also didn't deny what she'd done. I folded the letter carefully and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. In the alley behind my studio, I pulled the lid off a steel bin, struck a match, and dropped the letter inside. Flames licked the corners, curling the paper into ash. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just watched it burn. Not out of spite. Out of release. Because there are some things in life you don't archive, you let them turn to smoke. I walked back inside, locking the door behind me. My studio smelled like pine wood and varnish, brushes still soaking in the jar by the window. A canvas waited, half-finished, the light filtering through the glass onto its blank side. It had been weeks since I touched it. I'd been preparing for that night at the Delacroix estate for so long, I'd forgotten what my hands were capable of when they weren't clenched around history. But now there was space. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black and hot, and settled into the quiet. No phone calls, no emergency meetings, no press releases from Camille's PR team trying to reframe the fallout. Just stillness. And in that stillness, something new grew. The Donovan Foundation started with an idea scratched on a napkin during one of those lonely, rebuilding years. I'd been sleeping in the backseat of my car, eating off gas station shelves, applying to 20 jobs a day with a name that carried more baggage than a lost airport terminal. And in that darkness, I thought, what if someone had been there for me? Not to fix everything, just to believe me, just once. Now, that idea had a name, a purpose. The Donovan Foundation for Displaced Innovators. Not a charity, a second chance. The first recipient was a 19-year-old girl named Aria. A coder. Brilliant. Fierce. Her parents disowned her when she refused to give up her app idea and marry into the family business. She was living out of a friend's garage, teaching kids how to program on borrowed equipment. When I read her story, I saw myself. Not just the ambition, the exile. We funded her prototype, gave her workspace, connected her with a mentor. And when she sent her first thank you email, all she wrote was, "You made me feel seen." That was it. I didn't need Camille to fall on her knees. I didn't need Charles or Vivian to go public with their regret. And I sure as hell didn't need Tate to call and confess his embarrassment. Justice doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes, it's quiet. Sometimes, it looks like a burnt letter and a girl with a dream. I stood at the easel, paintbrush in hand, and looked at the canvas again. Then I dipped the bristles in cobalt blue, the color of rebirth, and made my first stroke in months. Not revenge. Not bitterness. Just color. Just movement. Freedom. Because healing doesn't come from making others bleed. It comes from rising while they remain where they left you. I wasn't the ghost anymore. I wasn't the forgotten. I was the author now. And my next chapter was just beginning. The moment we stepped into the lavish dining room of Emily's parents' house, I could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. The long mahogany table was set with the finest china, silverware polished to perfection, and an assortment of dishes that smelled as extravagant as they looked. To an outsider, this would have seemed like a warm family gathering. Laughter, wine glasses clinking, polite conversation, but I knew better. I had spent years walking into this house knowing that beneath the surface, tension brewed like a storm waiting to erupt. Emily, my wife, walked slightly ahead of me, her hand resting on my arm as she whispered, "Let's just get through tonight." Her voice was soft, pleading. I nodded, offering a small smile, but I knew the inevitable was coming. It always did. At the head of the table sat Henry, my father-in-law, a man who, despite his broad smile and charming presence, had a history of financial disasters that left ruin in his wake. He was the kind of man who always managed to shift the blame, never taking responsibility, always pointing fingers when things fell apart. And tonight, I could already tell, his target was me. Dinner started off civil enough. Conversations revolved around business updates, family gossip, and lighthearted banter. But I wasn't naive. I saw the way Henry kept stealing glances at me, his jaw tightening, his fingers tapping impatiently against his wine glass. He was waiting for his moment. And then it came. Henry stood abruptly, the scrape of his chair against the floor slicing through the chatter. The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward him. He cleared his throat dramatically, adjusting his suit as if he were about to deliver a presidential address. I knew this act. I had seen it too many times before. "Family," he began, his deep voice carrying an air of exaggerated importance. "There's something that needs to be said tonight. Something I can no longer keep inside." He paused, his eyes locking onto mine, filled with that familiar condescending arrogance. I exhaled slowly, bracing myself. Henry spread his arms in a theatrical gesture. "We are a family that supports one another, aren't we?" He glanced around, waiting for nods of agreement. Some family members murmured in response. Others just watched, sensing the tension. Emily, seated beside him, sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. She knew her father well enough to recognize when he was about to stir up trouble. Yet, as always, she remained caught between two worlds, her loyalty to him and her commitment to me. Henry turned back to me. Daniel, he said, my name rolling off his tongue with false camaraderie. You've done well for yourself. Very well. We're all so proud of you. His voice dripped with something that wasn't quite admiration. I didn't respond. I just waited. But, he continued, dragging out the word as if he were carefully constructing his next sentence. What kind of man achieves success and then forgets the people who helped him get there? There it was. The accusation. The setup for whatever grand spectacle he was planning. I could feel the shift in the room. People stiffened in their seats. A few exchanged uneasy glances. I remained quiet, my expression unreadable. This was Henry's game: manipulation, guilt, public humiliation. Emily shifted beside him. Her lips parted as if she wanted to interject, but she didn't. Henry pressed on. I've always believed that family should take care of one another. That's what we do. We lift each other up. We don't turn our backs when someone is struggling. His voice grew louder, conviction building as if he were rallying an audience. I stayed silent, letting him dig his own hole. Henry exhaled dramatically. And yet, despite knowing the difficulties I've faced, the struggles I've endured, despite everything I've done for you and Emily, you refuse to help me in my time of need. He looked around the table, gesturing for everyone to absorb his words. A few gasps, a few whispers, and then all eyes turned to me. It was the reaction he wanted, the trap he had set. Emily, finally finding her voice, placed a hand on his arm. Dad, maybe this isn't the time. Henry ignored her, his eyes fixed on me. Tell me, Daniel, he said, tilting his head, his smirk barely concealed. Do you really think you made it all on your own? I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I simply met his gaze, feeling the weight of his arrogance pressing against me. For years, he had implied this ridiculous notion that somehow, my success was because of him, that I owed him something, that my hard work, my sacrifices, my relentless pursuit of success weren't enough. I could have spoken then. I could have shut him down with cold, calculated words. But I wasn't interested in playing his game. So I simply leaned back in my chair, my voice calm but firm. I don't recall ever asking for anything from you, Henry. A murmur ran through the room. Henry's expression darkened. He hadn't expected me to challenge him outright. Daniel, Emily spoke now, her voice careful. You know family means everything to us. My father isn't asking for much. I turned to her, my wife, the woman I had built a life with. And yet, in this moment, I saw what I had been trying to ignore for years, the blind devotion, the unwavering belief that her father could do no wrong. And then she said the words that would change everything. You owe us for your success. The betrayal in that moment was sharp, unexpected. It sliced through the air like a dagger. A silence heavier than before settled over the room. My hands curled into fists beneath the table. I looked at her. I looked at Henry. And in that instant, I knew this wasn't just about money. This was about control, about power, about a debt I never owed, but one they had convinced themselves I should pay. Henry smiled triumphantly, mistaking my silence for submission. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had come prepared. And by the time this night was over, the truth would leave them speechless. I sat there, still, my fingers resting lightly against the cool surface of the dinner table. My mind wasn't on the murmurs spreading around the room or the triumphant smirk on Henry's face. It was elsewhere, replaying every moment, every warning sign, every manipulation that had led to this. Because this wasn't new. This wasn't the first time Henry had painted himself as a victim. It wasn't the first time he had twisted reality to fit his narrative. And it certainly wasn't the first time he had tried to make me the villain in his story. Henry's financial troubles were not a temporary misfortune. They were his lifestyle, a pattern, a cycle he refused to break. I still remembered the first time Emily had mentioned her father's rough patch. We were newly married, still caught in that honeymoon haze where love made everything seem conquerable. She had spoken about him with such sympathy, such conviction that I had believed her. He just needs a little help, she had said one night, curled up beside me. He's been through a lot. I had listened. I had trusted. But then, the story started to change. The bad investment he had made in a construction company that mysteriously collapsed overnight. The unfair lawsuit that drained his savings. Only for me to later discover he had lost the case because he never bothered to show up to court. The emergency that required a loan from Emily, which she later admitted was for a luxury car he couldn't afford. And worst of all, the gambling. The first time I saw it was at a poker night with friends. Henry had been charming, confident, laughing as he threw down his chips like a man who had nothing to lose. And maybe he didn't, because he was never the one paying the price. That night, I watched him bet recklessly, making promises he couldn't keep. By the end of the game, he had lost thousands. "I'll win it back," he had assured me. He never did. He never could. Because Henry wasn't unlucky. He wasn't just a man who made bad decisions. He was a man who never took responsibility. Every failure, every loss, every disaster, it was always someone else's fault. The economy, his business partners, his lawyers, his family, and now me. I could still remember the night. Everything had become crystal clear. Emily and I had been married for only a year when Henry had asked for his first favor. He had come to me, all charm and desperation, weaving a story so tragic it could have won an Oscar. "Daniel, I hate to even ask this," he had said, voice thick with emotion. "But I wouldn't if I wasn't out of options." He had promised it was just a temporary setback, a bad investment that had drained his accounts. "If you could just loan me something small, just to get me back on my feet, I swear, I'll pay you back in full." Emily had been there too, her eyes pleading. "He really is trying, Daniel." And so, against my better judgment, I had agreed. Not because I trusted Henry, but because I trusted my wife. I had given him the money, not a gift, not charity, but a loan. And to protect myself, I had made him sign a legal agreement. A simple contract, just something to keep things clear. At the time, it had seemed reasonable. A year passed, then another. Not a single payment, not a single mention of repaying what he owed. When I finally confronted him, he had laughed, as if the very idea was absurd. "Daniel, come on. It's family. You're acting like I'm some stranger off the street." That was Henry's favorite trick, turning debts into obligations, twisting generosity into something expected. And now, here he was again. Except this time, he wasn't just manipulating me in private. He was calling me out in front of the entire family, framing me as the villain, making me the selfish one. And Emily, my own wife, was standing right beside him. I looked at her now, searching for something in her face. Regret? Doubt. But all I saw was certainty. She actually believed him. She had bought into it completely. And that, more than Henry's words, more than the accusations, was what cut the deepest. Because I had spent years proving to her that I was nothing like her father. I had built my own success, brick by brick, without cutting corners, without leaning on handouts, without making excuses. I had worked long nights, taken risks, made sacrifices. I had earned everything I had. And yet, in this moment, my own wife was standing against me. I gritted my teeth, inhaling slowly. Not this time. I wasn't going to let Henry rewrite history. I wasn't going to let him paint me as the villain just because he refused to own up to his own failures. He wanted a public confrontation? Fine. He was about to get one. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my voice calm but firm. "Henry, let me ask you something." He smirked. "By all means. When exactly did I ever take anything from you?" The smirk faltered. The room was so silent I could hear the faint clink of a fork against a plate. "Because as far as I remember," I continued, "I've never once asked for a dime from this family. I've never borrowed money. I've never taken a handout. And yet, you keep acting like my success belongs to you." Henry scoffed, shaking his head. "That's not what I'm saying, isn't it?" I challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds an awful lot like you think I owe you something. Like you think my hard work, my sacrifices, my struggles, they don't belong to me. That I should just hand over my money because, what? You existed." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Henry's face darkened. Emily placed a hand on my arm. "Daniel, please." I pulled away. "No, Emily. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about your father's track record." Henry's chair scraped against the floor as he sat forward. "Watch yourself." I met his glare head on. Or what? For the first time, I saw it, the flicker of panic in his eyes. Because deep down, Henry knew exactly what I was capable of. And he knew that this time, he wasn't going to win. The weight of the room settled on my shoulders as I watched Henry lean back in his chair, his smirk returning, a look of false confidence stretched across his face. He wasn't used to being challenged, not like this, not in front of an audience. He had built his life on manipulation, on twisting narratives, on making himself the victim. And tonight, in this room filled with family, he was trying to do it again. But I wasn't the same man who had once sat silently, allowing him to frame his failures as my responsibility. Henry cleared his throat and straightened his tie, his voice booming once more, this time laced with an artificial gentleness that I knew was meant to make him appear reasonable. Daniel, you don't have to be so defensive. We're just having a conversation as family. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Some of the relatives, the ones who had always sided with Henry's dramatics, nodded as if he were making perfect sense. I exhaled slowly, keeping my expression unreadable. Is that what this is? I asked, tilting my head. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds a lot more like a public shaming session. Henry chuckled, shaking his head as if I were being unreasonable. No, you're taking this the wrong way. His voice softened, playing to the crowd. I'm just saying, when someone in the family has success, they should remember where they came from. They should remember the people who stood by them. And there it was. The same tired speech. The same attempt to tie my success to him, as if he had lifted me up on his shoulders, as if he had done anything other than drag people down. But before I could respond, something happened that sent a jolt through my entire body. Emily stood up. For a brief second, I hoped, that she was going to put an end to this, that she was going to defend me, to tell her father to stop. Instead, she turned to me, her voice steady, her expression unreadable. You owe us for your success. A coldness swept through me, a realization so sharp it nearly made me laugh. This wasn't just Henry's manipulation. Emily believed it too. She had bought into it completely. I stared at her, my wife, the woman I had built my life with, and I could see the conviction in her eyes. This wasn't something she was saying to placate her father. She genuinely believed that my success was not my own, that I owed them, that I owed her. A slow, eerie silence fell over the room as everyone waited for my reaction. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. Henry, emboldened by Emily's declaration, stood straighter. See, son? He smiled, spreading his arms as if to embrace the entire room. This isn't just me saying it. Even your wife, your own wife, understands the importance of family. She understands loyalty. I clenched my jaw, my hands resting against the smooth surface of the table. Loyalty. That word, loyalty, was twisted in his mouth. Because to Henry, loyalty was not about love or commitment. It was about control. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of the moment settle, and then, finally, I exhaled. You want to talk about loyalty, Henry? I asked, my voice measured even. Henry smirked, thinking he had won. Of course. Loyalty is what keeps a family strong. I let out a short, humorless chuckle, shaking my head. Loyalty, I repeated. Loyalty is when you stand by someone when times get tough. Loyalty is when you don't abandon someone because they don't do what you want. Loyalty is when you don't use someone's success as a way to manipulate them. Henry's smirk twitched, his confidence faltering just slightly. I turned to Emily. Loyalty is not looking at your husband, the man who built his success from the ground up, and telling him he owes you for it. Her face flickered with something. Anger, maybe, or guilt. But she didn't back down. Henry stepped forward, eager to regain control. Daniel, no one's saying you didn't work hard. His voice was coated in feigned reasonableness. But you didn't do it alone. You had Emily. You had us. And now, you're living a life that we helped you build. There it was. The final, desperate attempt to pull me into his lie. I folded my arms, leaning back slightly. How? Exactly. Did you help me build anything? Henry blinked. What? I mean it, I said, tilting my head. Explain to me exactly what you did that contributed to my success. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face. Was it the years I spent working 2 jobs just to afford college? I asked. Was it the nights I spent at my desk, building my company from scratch while you were out spending money you didn't have? Henry's face darkened. Was it the loans I had to take out? Loans that I, unlike you, actually paid back? Was it the sacrifices I made? The exhaustion? The risks? I let out a sharp laugh. No, Henry, you didn't help me. You sat back and watched while I worked my ass off. And now, because I actually made it, you want to rewrite history and tell everyone that I owe you for it. The silence in the room was deafening. Henry's face turned red, his hands curling into fists. You ungrateful. I held up a hand, stopping him. No, you don't get to do this anymore. You don't get to play the victim. You don't get to spin your lies. I turned to Emily, my voice steady. And you? She flinched. Daniel, I have given you everything, I said. A home, stability, love. I have never, not once, made you feel like you owed me for anything. And yet, you stand here and tell me that I owe you? Her lips parted, but no words came out. Henry, realizing he was losing his grip, slammed his fist against the table. Enough of this. You will respect me. I laughed. Actually laughed. Respect? Henry, respect is earned. And you've done nothing to earn mine. His entire face turned a deep shade of red. You arrogant son of a... Careful, Henry. I warned, my voice dangerously low. His nostrils flared, his hands shaking. He was losing control. Good. Because this time, I wasn't playing his game. I wasn't bending. I wasn't giving in. And he was about to learn just how much power he didn't have over me. The room felt like a battlefield, the tension so thick it was suffocating. The air was charged, filled with the lingering weight of Henry's accusations and Emily's betrayal. Every single person at the dinner table was holding their breath, watching, waiting. Henry stood tall, his chest puffed out, feeding off the silence, believing he had won. He thought he had me cornered. He thought I had no way out. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had come prepared. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair, my fingers tapping against the smooth wood of the table. My mind was clear, my pulse steady. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. I was simply going to show them the truth. With deliberate slowness, I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. Henry's smirk wavered slightly as I pulled out a neatly folded document. The movement was small, but the effect was immediate. The room stilled. Henry's eyes flickered to the paper in my hand, and I could see the first flicker of unease creeping into his expression. I unfolded it, the crisp sound of paper slicing through the silence like a knife. I held it up between my fingers, letting everyone see it before speaking. That's interesting, Henry, I said, my voice calm, controlled. Because if I owe you so much, then maybe you can explain this. I turned the document so that the family could see the printed words at the top. Loan agreement. The effect was immediate. The murmurs began, whispers spreading like wildfire. I watched as faces twisted in confusion, as some leaned closer to get a better look. And then, finally, Henry's face drained of color. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the way he was scrambling for an excuse, a way out. I didn't give him one. I flipped through the pages, reading aloud. This document, signed and dated 5 years ago, is a legal loan agreement between myself and Henry, in which I lent him. I paused, glancing up, my voice sharp. A substantial amount of money. The whispers grew louder. Emily's face was frozen in shock, her lips slightly parted. Henry tried to compose himself, shaking his head with forced laughter. This is ridiculous. Is it? I mused, my voice dangerously low. I turned to the family, making sure every single person in the room could hear me. Because according to this, Henry agreed to pay me back within 2 years. I snapped the document closed. It's been 5. A collective gasp rippled through the table. Henry's breathing turned shallow. I could see his mind racing, desperately trying to find a way to spin this. This is fake, he scoffed, but his voice cracked at the end. You're making this up. I smiled. Oh, I figured you'd say that. I reached into my pocket again and pulled out another sheet of paper. This one, a notarized copy of the original loan agreement. Stamped. Sealed. Verified. Henry's face contorted. You son of a... Careful. I warned, my voice dangerously even. Watch your next words, Henry. The room fell into stunned silence. Emily looked between us, her face ashen. Dad? She whispered, barely audible. Is this true? Henry let out a humorless laugh, straightening his shoulders as if he could somehow regain control. What does it matter, Emily? We're family. He's acting like I'm just some stranger. You are some stranger when it comes to money, I cut in smoothly. Because you weren't struggling when you asked me for that loan, Henry. You weren't some man down on his luck. You were just a man who saw an opportunity. Emily's voice cracked as she turned to her father. You told me you never asked him for money. Henry didn't respond. And that silence? It said everything. I turned back to the family, scanning the room. So, tell me, I asked, my voice carrying across the table. Who exactly owes who? The expressions in the room shifted. Some looked shocked. Others looked uncomfortable. But the most satisfying reaction? The ones who had been nodding along with Henry just minutes ago, who had been so quick to jump on his side, were now leaning away from him. Henry clenched his fists, shaking his head, his voice rising. "This is absurd. You're really going to hold this against me, Daniel? After everything I've done for you?" I arched a brow. "Done for me?" "Yes." He gestured wildly. "Who do you think took care of Emily while you were building your career? Who supported her? Who gave her a home?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "A home you almost lost because of your gambling?" The air in the room grew even heavier. Emily's fingers trembled as she pressed them to her mouth. Henry was losing control. "You think you're better than me, huh?" His voice was thick with anger now. "You think just because you've made a little money, you can talk down to me?" I leaned forward, my voice calm. "No, Henry. I think I don't owe you anything. And that drives you insane." His hands curled into fists, his body shaking. He was teetering on the edge, his anger barely contained. And then, the inevitable happened. He snapped. "You ungrateful piece of—" His voice exploded as he lunged forward, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His hands came up, rage twisting his face. But before he could reach me, a hand shot out. Matt, Emily's cousin, a former college football player, grabbed Henry mid-motion, shoving him back down into his seat. "Sit down." His voice was sharp, his grip firm. Henry struggled, his chest heaving, but he wasn't getting past Matt. The room erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped. Gasps filled the air. Emily was on her feet, her eyes wide with horror. "Dad, stop." Henry looked around, realizing that the entire room had turned against him. For the first time in his life, his manipulation had failed. For the first time, he had been outplayed. I adjusted my sleeves, standing slowly, my voice calm despite the chaos. "You wanted a public confrontation, Henry." I looked around the room, my gaze sweeping over the family. I hope it was worth it. And then, I turned and walked away. Because the truth had already done the damage. And Henry? He would never recover from it. As I stepped back, watching Henry struggle in his chair, I felt a wave of clarity wash over me. He was seething, his face contorted in fury, but he wasn't yelling anymore. He knew. He knew he had lost. The weight of the documents I had revealed had crushed his carefully woven narrative, and for the first time, his lies had no place to hide. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence, their gazes bouncing between Henry and me like spectators at a match they hadn't realized they were attending. Some looked horrified, others betrayed. But the most notable reaction? The absolute, undeniable absence of support for Henry. He was finally exposed. I turned to Emily, who sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table as though she needed something solid to hold on to. Her eyes were fixed on the document I had placed on the table, and in them, I saw something worse than anger. Doubt. Doubt in everything she had been told. Doubt in her father. Doubt in herself. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but firm. "Did you know about this?" She didn't answer immediately. Her lips parted, her breath uneven, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "No, I didn't." I studied her, trying to determine if she was lying, but I didn't think she was. The genuine shock on her face told me she had never seen this agreement before. And that made sense. Henry wasn't the type to leave a paper trail for his schemes. He thrived on manipulating emotions, spinning sob stories, and playing the victim. The last thing he would have wanted was for Emily to see a signed document proving his lies. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Relatives leaned toward each other, whispering, their expressions shifting. Some looked disgusted. Others looked downright furious. And then, from across the table, Emily's Aunt Linda suddenly stood up. I turned my head just in time to see her shaking her head in disbelief, her lips pressing together before she let out a bitter laugh. "Since we're talking about who owes who," she said, her voice carrying across the room. Henry's eyes snapped toward her, and for the first time, I saw something resembling true panic in his expression. "Linda, don't." "No." Her voice was sharp, cutting through his attempt to silence her. "No more covering for you, Henry." The room quieted again as all eyes fell on her. She took a deep breath, her fingers clenching at the napkin in her hands. "Since we're exposing the truth tonight, let me go ahead and ask you something, Henry. When exactly do you plan on paying back the $50,000 you took from me?" Gasps rippled through the room. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't dare interrupt. Henry's head snapped toward her, his mouth opening, and closing like a fish out of water. I don't know what you're talking about. Linda let out a sharp laugh, her hands slamming onto the table. Oh, don't play dumb with me. You came to me 8 years ago, crying about an amazing business opportunity that you just needed a little investment for. You promised me, swore to me, that I'd get double my money back in 6 months. And what happened? The color in Henry's face deepened, but his mouth remained tightly shut. You disappeared. Linda's voice trembled with fury. You stopped answering my calls, my messages. And when I finally did get a hold of you, you fed me some nonsense about the market crashing. And then, you had the audacity to ask for more money to fix the problem. A few family members exchanged uncomfortable looks. Others outright scowled at Henry. Emily's fingers trembled against the table. She looked from Linda to her father, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad, is that true? Henry shot to his feet, his voice booming in an attempt to regain control. I borrowed that money, and things didn't go as planned. That's all. You act like I stole it. Linda scoffed, shaking her head. You did steal it. Because an honest man would have made an effort to pay it back. An honest man would have taken responsibility. Before Henry could argue, another voice piped up. Wait. This time, it was Emily's cousin, David. My eyes snapped to him, watching as he slowly stood, his brows furrowing. Henry, didn't you ask me for money last year? A fresh wave of whispers swept through the room. Henry's head jerked toward David, his panic barely concealed. David, sit down. This isn't. No, actually. David's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with realization. You told me you had emergency medical bills, that you just needed $20,000 to cover it. He let out a breath. That was a lie, wasn't it? The puzzle pieces were clicking into place, fast. And Henry? He was losing control. More voices joined in. Wait, Henry asked me for money a few years ago, too. Said it was for a legal issue. No, he told me he needed help keeping the house from foreclosure. He asked me for 15 grand for his car. The entire room erupted. Henry had been bleeding the entire family dry. One by one, the relatives realized they had all been played. The murmur of whispers turned into full-blown conversations, accusations flying. The realization dawning that Henry wasn't just a man down on his luck. He was a fraud, a scam artist. And now, everyone knew it. Henry's face contorted in pure panic. He shot his hands up, his voice shaking. This is insane. You're all turning on me for what? A couple of misunderstandings. Linda turned toward me, her voice filled with bitter amusement. And here he was, lecturing you about owing the family. I let out a slow breath, glancing at Emily. Her face was pale, her fingers gripping the table like she was trying to ground herself. This moment, it was the moment she realized her father wasn't just flawed. He was dangerous. And I knew. This was only the beginning of his downfall. Henry, sensing the shift, let out a ragged breath. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice hoarse. This is your fault. I arched a brow. No, Henry. My voice was calm, unshaken. This is yours. For the first time, Henry had no escape. He was finally exposed. And the family? They were done with him. The silence in the room had shifted from uncomfortable tension to something far heavier, something irreversible. Henry, once the master of weaving his own version of reality, sat cornered, surrounded by the weight of his own lies. No one was on his side now. Emily hadn't moved, her hands still gripping the table. Her breathing was uneven, her face pale. The woman who had stood by her father just minutes ago, convinced of his innocence, was now sitting in stunned disbelief as the truth unraveled before her. And then, just when I thought Henry had reached his breaking point, another voice cut through the air. Since we're talking about debts, the voice belonged to Linda. Again, I turned, watching as Emily's aunt rose to her feet, adjusting the glasses perched on her nose. But this time, her expression wasn't just anger. It was pure, unfiltered rage. She exhaled sharply, her fingers tightening into fists at her sides. Henry, I have a question for you. Henry's jaw clenched. Linda, this is getting ridiculous. No, Henry, she snapped, cutting him off. I think we should all talk about this. A heavy pause. Linda let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Because, for years, I have sat here listening to your nonsense. I have watched you lie and manipulate and make everyone else responsible for your failures. Her voice wavered, but she pressed forward. I watched you destroy my sister, your own wife. I watched you empty her savings, break her spirit, and when she needed you the most. Her voice cracked. You left her with nothing. A fresh wave of murmurs rippled through the family. Emily flinched. Aunt Linda, what are you talking about? Linda's eyes flashed toward Emily, and for the first time all evening, there was no softness in them. Just cold, unrelenting truth. Your mother, she said, voice steady. Did you ever wonder why she always seemed anxious about money? Why she could never quite relax? Why she? She paused, pressing her lips together. Why she had nothing to leave behind when she passed. Emily blinked. She was a stay-at-home mom. Dad took care of everything. Linda let out a bitter laugh. Oh, sweetheart. She shook her head. Your father didn't take care of anything. Henry's face twisted. That's enough. But Linda wasn't done. Your mother had a secret bank account, she continued, her voice unwavering. She started it when she realized your father was burning through their finances, lying to her about investments, racking up debt in both their names. Emily's breath hitched. No. Yes, Linda countered. And do you know what happened when she died? She turned to Henry now, her expression filled with nothing but disdain. He emptied it. Every last cent. Gasps filled the room. Henry's fists curled, his entire body shaking with barely contained rage. That was my money, Linda. My wife's savings. I had every right. You had no right. Linda's voice was sharp. That money was meant for Emily. For her future. For her security. And you. She let out a slow, shaky breath. You took it. Gambled it away. Used it to fund whatever doomed scheme you were running at the time. I didn't even realize my hands had curled into fists beneath the table. I stole a glance at Emily. She was frozen. Completely, utterly frozen. Her breathing was shallow, her fingers trembling where they rested on the table. For years, she had believed her father was just a flawed man. A man who had made some bad choices, but meant well. But now, she was seeing him for what he truly was. A liar. A thief. A fraud. Emily, Linda's voice softened. I never told you because I didn't want to break your heart. I didn't want you to have to face the truth about the man who raised you. She exhaled. But I see now that protecting you from the truth only gave him more power. Emily didn't respond. Her hands slowly slipped from the table into her lap, and she stared blankly ahead. Henry's breathing was ragged, his body tense. You all think you're so righteous, he hissed, his voice trembling. But none of you know what it's like. I did what I had to do to survive. A sharp laugh came from the far end of the table. Survive? Everyone turned. David, Emily's cousin. He was leaning back in his chair, arms folded, shaking his head. Henry, you weren't surviving. You were thriving off other people's suffering. Henry's nostrils flared. You have no idea what I've been through. David scoffed. Oh, really? Let's break it down then. He held up a finger. 1. You took $50,000 from Aunt Linda. Never paid it back. He lifted another finger. 2. You took $20,000 from me, under false pretenses. A third finger. 3. You emptied your wife's savings. Another. 4. You signed a legal loan agreement with Daniel. Also never paid back. He slammed his hands onto the table. So tell me, Henry, exactly how do you expect anyone here to believe a word you say? The silence that followed was thunderous. Henry's mouth opened, then shut, because he had no defense. None at all. And then, Emily moved. Slowly, deliberately, she stood from the table. Her hands were still trembling, but when she turned to face her father, there was no softness left in her eyes. Just realization. Just acceptance. Is it true? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry swallowed hard. Emily, sweetheart. No, her voice was stronger this time. I don't want excuses. I don't want a speech. I just want the truth. Henry's face twitched, his lips pressing together. And then, finally, he exhaled and gave her the only thing he had left. The truth. Yes, he whispered. The entire room stilled. Emily took a step back as if she had been physically struck. A slow, painful breath escaped her lips. You stole from Mom. Henry flinched. Emily shook her head, her expression crumbling. I defended you. No one spoke. The only sound was the quiet shudder of her breath as she tried, and failed, to hold back the realization that her entire life had been built on a lie. And in that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Emily's face was drained of color, her hands trembling at her sides. The weight of the revelation settled on her shoulders, pressing down like an anchor. For years, she had defended her father, had stood by him, had believed every carefully crafted story he told. But now, she saw him for who he truly was. The man who had stolen from her mother. The man who had bled their family dry. The man who had manipulated, deceived, and used her. Henry, standing across from her, looked desperate now. He wasn't angry anymore. He was terrified, because he knew. He knew that for the first time in his life, he had lost control of her. "Emily," he said, his voice raw. "You have to understand." She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin, quivering line. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "I don't have to understand anything." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Henry's eyes darted across the room, searching for someone, anyone, who might still be on his side. But the faces surrounding him were blank, cold, unreadable. Even the people who had been nodding along to his accusations earlier were silent now. They had seen the truth. They had seen what he really was. And then, something inside him snapped. Henry slammed his hands down on the table, the sound echoing through the room. His face twisted with fury, his eyes wild. "You all think you're better than me?" he roared, his voice shaking the very walls. No one moved. No one spoke. But Henry wasn't done. "I'm the reason this family even exists." His voice cracked as he pointed a trembling finger at Emily. "You wouldn't even be here if it weren't for me. You owe me everything." Emily flinched, but she didn't step back. She just stared. And then, slowly, she exhaled and laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was hollow, empty, broken. Henry's face twisted in confusion. "What? You don't even believe your own lies anymore, do you?" she said softly, shaking her head. "You're just throwing words around, hoping something sticks." Henry's entire body tensed. "That's not true." Emily's eyes burned into him. "Isn't it?" His breath hitched. And then, the final blow landed. "I don't owe you anything." The room was silent. Utterly, completely silent. For the first time in her life, Emily had broken free. Henry's nostrils flared, his chest rising and falling rapidly. And then, he lunged. His hands shot forward, rage taking over, his body moving faster than his mind could process. But I was already ready. I stood between him and Emily. I felt his weight slam into me, the force of his anger driving forward. But I didn't move. He shoved at my chest, but I held firm, my hands curling around his wrists, stopping him cold. His breath came out in sharp, ragged bursts, his eyes wild as he struggled against my grip. "Let me go." I didn't. I tightened my grip. "No." His face twisted. "You think you're some kind of hero, huh? Protecting her from me." I tilted my head, my voice low. "You need to sit down, Henry. Now." But he couldn't. Because this wasn't just about me. This wasn't just about Emily. This was his breaking point. For years, he had manipulated and twisted and controlled the people in this family. And now, he was watching it crumble in front of him. His power was gone. His control was gone. And he had nothing left. He thrashed against my grip again, but I didn't move, didn't budge. Finally, Matt, Emily's cousin, a former football player, stood as well. He was taller than me, stronger. And when he moved, the look in his eyes told me everything. This wasn't a fight Henry was going to win. Matt placed a hand on Henry's shoulder, gripping tight. "Sit down." Henry's body went rigid. Matt wasn't asking. He was ordering. Henry swallowed hard, his breath uneven. And then, he sat. Hard. His face was flushed red, his hands shaking in his lap. He looked up at Emily, his voice breaking. "You're turning against me?" Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time all evening, her eyes softened, not with love, but pity. "No, Dad," she whispered. "You turned against yourself." A muscle in Henry's jaw twitched. Emily exhaled, closing her eyes for just a second before looking back at me. "Let's go." The words sent a shockwave through Henry. "Wait, what?" His voice cracked. "Emily, no, we need to talk about this. We need to fix this." She shook her head. "You had years to fix this." Henry's breath caught. Emily's sweetheart, but she was already turning, already walking away. I followed, my hand pressing lightly against the small of her back as she moved past me, past the table, past the stunned faces of her family members. Henry shot to his feet again. "You walk out that door, Emily, and you're dead to me." She paused, just for a second, and then she turned her head slightly, just enough to meet his eyes one final time. You were dead to me the second you stole from Mom. Henry's entire body collapsed. I watched as something inside him shattered. And then, I turned, and we left. We walked out of that house. Out of the life Henry had tried so hard to keep us trapped in. Out of his control. Out of his power. Emily's hand slipped into mine, her grip tight. And as we stepped into the cold night air, she let out a shaky breath, whispering so softly I almost didn't hear it. I'm finally free. And for the first time in a long, long time, I knew she was right. The night air was crisp as we stepped outside, leaving behind the suffocating walls of the house that had held so much tension, manipulation, and deceit. Emily walked beside me, her breath shaky but steady, her fingers curled tightly around mine. She wasn't crying. Not yet. But I could feel it coming. The weight of what had just happened hadn't fully hit her yet. It was lingering in the air, waiting to settle, waiting for the reality of her father's deception to sink in. I squeezed her hand gently, guiding her toward the car. Do you want to drive? I asked softly, knowing she probably needed something, anything, to ground herself. She shook her head. No, just take me anywhere but here. I nodded, unlocking the doors. She slid into the passenger seat without another word, staring straight ahead, her lips pressed into a thin line. I started the car and pulled away from the house, glancing in the rearview mirror one last time. Through the large dining room window, I saw Henry still standing, frozen, his face slack with disbelief. The man who had spent his life controlling others had just lost everything. And for once, he had no one to blame but himself. I didn't feel sorry for him, not in the slightest. But I did feel something else, determination. Because this wasn't over. Not yet. Not by a long shot. The aftermath begins. We drove in silence for nearly 20 minutes before Emily finally spoke. How long have you known? I kept my eyes on the road. That your dad was a liar? She exhaled, a tired, bitter sound. That he stole from my mom. That he used the whole family. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I had my suspicions for a while, but I didn't have proof until recently. Her head turned toward me. How did you get that contract? I sighed, glancing at her before focusing on the road again. I had a feeling your dad would try something like this eventually. So when he came to me for money years ago, I made him sign a legal loan agreement. She blinked. And you never told me? Would you have believed me if I did? Silence. She looked down, her fingers twisting in her lap. No. And that was the hardest part of all. For so many years, she had been blind to who her father truly was. I had tried to warn her, tried to hint at the things I had seen, the things I had uncovered. But Henry was good, too good, at keeping her under his spell. Until tonight. Until he finally went too far. I pulled into the parking lot of a quiet cafe, turning off the engine. The place was nearly empty, dimly lit. A perfect place for a conversation that neither of us had been prepared to have. Emily didn't move at first. Then, slowly, she exhaled. I feel like my entire life was a lie. I reached for her hand, squeezing it. It wasn't a lie. You just didn't know the full story. She let out a humorless laugh, shaking her head. How did I not see it? How did I let him fool me for so long? I hesitated before answering. Because you wanted to believe in him. She swallowed hard. I defended him. I stood beside him. I turned against you. Her voice cracked on the last word. And then, the dam broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silent and raw. She turned away, pressing her palms to her face, her body shaking. Oh my God, Daniel. Her voice was muffled. What have I done? I reached for her, pulling her into my arms. She collapsed against me, sobbing, gripping my shirt as though she were drowning. I held her, rubbing slow circles against her back, whispering soothing words. You didn't do anything wrong. I betrayed you, she choked out. I let him turn me against you. I shook my head. No, Emily. You were manipulated. Just like the rest of them. She pulled back slightly, her red-rimmed eyes meeting mine. But you knew better. You saw through him. I exhaled slowly. Because I've seen men like him before. Her brows furrowed. What do you mean? I hesitated. My father was the same. Shock flickered across her face. I had never told her this before. Never wanted to bring my own past into our marriage, into her world. But now, maybe she needed to hear it. He spent his life blaming everyone but himself. Always finding excuses. Always making my mom feel guilty for his failures. I watched her break herself trying to fix him. Trying to believe that if she just supported him enough, he'd change. Emily's breath hitched. That sounds exactly like my mom. I nodded. Because that's what men like Henry do. They make the people who love them feel responsible for their mess. And by the time you realize the truth, you're already too deep in it. She inhaled sharply, nodding as more tears slipped down her cheeks. I feel so stupid. You're not stupid, Emily. You're human. Silence stretched between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then, she straightened, wiping her face with her sleeve. So what do we do now? I studied her carefully. Are you asking as my wife or as Henry's daughter? A slow exhale. As your wife. I nodded. Then we do what's right. The plan for justice. The next morning, we made calls. To Linda. To David. To Matt. To every single person Henry had ever manipulated. We gathered proof. We compiled records. We dug through financial statements. And within days, we had a case. A lawsuit. A fraud investigation. Everything Henry had hidden for years was about to come crashing down. Emily didn't hesitate. She didn't falter. She signed her name on the official complaint against him, alongside her family members who had once defended him. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't protecting him anymore. She was standing against him. And when Henry called, begging, pleading, swearing he'd fix everything, she didn't answer. She didn't owe him anything. Not anymore. This time, Henry was going to pay. The weight of everything we had set into motion settled heavily on my shoulders as I sat in the living room, my laptop open, scanning through the legal documents. It was all there, the records, the statements, the paper trail that Henry thought he had hidden. But the truth always has a way of coming out. Emily sat across from me, her knees drawn up to her chest, staring blankly at the television. It wasn't on. She wasn't watching anything. She was just there, processing, waiting, feeling the sharp edges of betrayal cut into her all over again. I watched her for a long moment before finally speaking. The case has been filed. Her eyes flickered toward me, hollow and tired. And what happens now? I exhaled, closing my laptop. Now, we wait. The first cracks. We didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Henry's world started crumbling. The first thing to hit him was the lawsuit. The moment it became official, his bank accounts were frozen. All the money he had left, every stolen cent, was now under scrutiny. And suddenly, the man who had always lived large, who had always relied on the next scam, the next lie, the next investment to keep himself afloat, had nothing. The moment he realized what was happening, he called Emily. I watched as her phone lit up on the table. The name Dad flashed across the screen. She stared at it, unmoving. It rang, and rang, and rang, until it stopped, until it went to voicemail. She let out a slow breath, closing her eyes. He's panicking. I nodded. He should be. The reputation collapse. The next blow came from the community. Linda, David, and a few of the other family members had gone public with their accusations. They weren't holding back anymore. They were warning people. Henry had spent his life manipulating and charming his way through social circles. He had always been the man who knew people, who made connections, who acted like he was above it all. But this time, the whispers weren't about his so-called success. This time, the whispers were about how he had lied, how he had stolen, how he had destroyed his own family. His business partners began pulling away. His social circles shrank. And then, the final nail in the coffin. A local news outlet picked up the story. And suddenly, it wasn't just our family talking about Henry's lies. The entire town was talking. I found the article online before Emily did. I hesitated before showing it to her, but in the end, I knew she needed to see it. She read it slowly, her hands gripping the edges of the phone as she scrolled. Local businessman accused of defrauding family, multiple lawsuits pending. Her fingers trembled as she reached the last line. Henry's family members, including his own daughter, have taken legal action against him, citing years of manipulation, financial deceit, and theft. Many are now wondering just how much of his success was ever real. She let out a breath, her voice shaking. It's real now. Everyone knows. I watched her carefully. How do you feel? She blinked, as if the question had caught her off guard. She looked down at the phone again, then up at me. Lighter. The final desperation. That night, Henry showed up at our house. We heard the knock first. Loud, frantic, desperate. Emily tensed immediately, her entire body going rigid. It's him. I stood, my jaw tightening. Stay here. I walked to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't afraid of Henry. Not in the slightest. But I knew desperate men do desperate things. I cracked the door open, just enough to see his face. And God, he looked ruined. His clothes were wrinkled. His hair was a mess. His eyes were bloodshot, wild with desperation. Daniel. His voice was hoarse. We need to talk. I didn't move. There's nothing to talk about, Henry. Please. He actually pleaded. I had never seen him like this. I made mistakes. I know that. But you can't do this to me. You can't. I tilted my head. I didn't do anything, Henry. You did this to yourself. His face contorted. You have to drop the lawsuits. You have to. I cut him off. No. He blinked rapidly, his breathing ragged. Daniel, please. I'll pay you back. I laughed. With what money? His lips parted, but no words came out. Because he had nothing left. No money. No power. No allies. He swallowed hard, looking past me. Is Emily home? She doesn't want to see you, Henry. A sharp breath. She's my daughter. I shook my head slowly. Not anymore. And then, I closed the door. The consequences arrive. The following weeks were brutal for Henry. He tried to fight back against the lawsuits, but without money, without resources, he was powerless. His house was seized. His accounts were drained. His social standing was destroyed. Every bridge he had ever built, every connection he had ever used, was gone. And finally, after years of scamming, stealing, and manipulating, he was left with nothing. And I didn't feel sorry for him. Not one bit. The final call. Weeks passed before Emily heard from him again. She was sitting beside me on the couch when her phone rang. She saw the name, Dad, flash on the screen. She stared at it. I watched her. Do you want to answer? She hesitated. Then, slowly, she picked it up and put it on speaker. Emily. His voice was quiet. Broken. She didn't say anything. A beat of silence. Then, I lost everything. Emily inhaled deeply. I know. Another pause. Then, I don't know what to do. Emily was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, she spoke. Figure it out. And then, she hung up. She set the phone down. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time in weeks. She looked at me. And then, she smiled. Not a broken smile. Not a sad smile. But a real one. Because for the first time in her life, Henry had no power over her. And that was the best revenge of all. The world moved on. After all the chaos, all the lies, all the destruction, life didn't stop to mourn Henry's downfall. There was no grand reckoning, no public apology, no dramatic redemption arc where he realized the error of his ways. No. Instead, he simply faded. And that was the cruelest punishment of all. A life without Henry. It had been months since Emily last spoke to her father. At first, she had expected some kind of grand gesture, some desperate attempt to fix everything, to win her back, to weave another story of redemption. But it never came. Instead, what came were the consequences. Henry lost his house first. When the lawsuits drained his accounts, he could no longer afford the mortgage on the home he had once used as a symbol of his success. I imagined the look on his face when he saw the eviction notice, when he realized that the empire he had built on deception had finally crumbled. Emily heard from distant relatives that he was living in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, barely making ends meet. I could picture it. A man who once thrived on being the center of attention, now completely irrelevant. No one cared about his excuses anymore. No one listened to his stories. No one was left to manipulate. He had spent his life burning bridges, and when the fire died down, he was left standing in the ashes, alone, healing and moving forward. Emily changed in ways I never expected. At first, I had worried that her guilt would consume her, that she would get lost in the shame of how long she had defended him, how long she had let him control her. But instead, she grew. She started therapy. She reconnected with the family members who had been hurt by Henry, offering apologies, building back the relationships that had suffered under his manipulation. She became stronger, more sure of herself, and most importantly, she let go. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find her sitting on the couch, holding an old photo album. When she looked up at me, she smiled. A real smile. I sat beside her, glancing at the picture she had paused on. It was a photo of her as a child, sitting on Henry's shoulders, laughing. I waited, watching her carefully, wondering if she would break down. Instead, she exhaled and closed the album, setting it aside. I don't hate him. I nodded, waiting. I don't forgive him either. She looked at me, her eyes clear. But I don't have to carry this anymore.